Her trajectory seems a little bit like St. Augustine's. St. Augustine, too, had to leave somebody he loved in order to hew to the Catholic faith and to his trajectory, in his case, to be a priest and then a bishop. Dorothy Day had a series of bad relationships or imperfect relationships with men, and apparently eventually just came to terms with that and just moved on. And in the case of Forster, just basically dealt with the fact that she wasn't going to be able to have him because she couldn't have him in a married state. And she moved on and she put her energies into a love of God and love of others that were more sustainable and, in her view, far better. So I've been reading this little book, The Reckless Way of Love. You can see how this woman was not only this radical, almost, she says we should ask God to teach us the secrets of his love. Insist on this love with importunity. No other love is happy unless it finds its roots in this. Okay. And I think when she says this, she is thinking about her other loves and comparing and thinking about what is lasting. She says, loving God seems to be loving nothing, all right, which would be the sort of rejoinder. But there is a definite way. We must learn the rules. There is infinite happiness waiting. Also, it will free us from the slavery of other loves. Okay. God is nothing else but love. I think this was not easy for her, and I think that's why she had to write about it so much, but she had had great loves of a worldly kind, and she had this beautiful daughter as a result of one of them, but none of them had given her anything close to the satisfaction and joy that she had in moments with her God. And so even though it was not always present in her life in a palpable sense, and she acknowledged that, the pursuit of God and God's pursuit of her, more importantly, right? She said that God pursued her like a hound, on her heels, from the bohemian way of life and those worldly loves and the sort of radicalism that's partly adventuresome, to a solid, commitment to the Christian religion, as well as to her principles, to the poor, and to the workers. This is a great quote from Dorothy Day that shows her theological perspective. She says, "It's a terrible thought." What she means by this is that it's scary as all get out, let's say, okay? It's scary as all get out. That we love God as much as we love the one we love least. If that's true, that is a terrible thought, because it is very difficult to love the one we love the least, even for people who really try. And yet Dorothy Day seemed to truly believe that Jesus was in even the least, and even those we love the least or like the least. And so she struggled to love everybody, regardless of whether they loved back, not for their own sake alone, but because they were also God. And I say that her faith was modern because, having read some of her thoughts, she quotes Pascal, so this isn't just me making this connection. She references Pascal's wager. Pascal basically said that, if there is no God, but you act as though there is a God, you'll be better off for it anyway. If there is no God and you die, nothing will happen. So you haven't lost anything. If you live without God, you're not going to be as inspired, and you're not going to do as many good things perhaps with your life. So you're worse off. So you might as well act as though there is a God and hope that there is one. You can't lose. Okay, so that it's a pretty modern, it's a sort of existentialist, almost Kierkegaardian view of the choice of faith. And so I think that Dorothy Day did struggle with faith like so many other Christians as far as where was the concrete proof. But she often said, like at one point she said, well, I don't even understand how radio waves work. And yet I know there's radio and I can hear the radio program. I really don't need to know exactly how God works or where he is. I can still believe in God. I can still know in that sense that there is a God. So Day didn't have this absolute certainty at all points. And she knew what her faith was based upon, which was a choice. And she said, faith is a choice. So this is something also to explore, and it's Day's writings, I think, are a great resource, a great well of inspiration. Part of what I was going to talk about today has to do with the charity model. Now, we these days tend to think charity is good, but we also tend to think that because it's the only choice that we have if we're going to help people. And I mean that broadly, like charity, either in the form of us giving money to an organization that feeds people or houses them, or even like you directly help, but it's basically one way. Or it could even mean, the use of government programs to help people. That is a certain model which Dorothy Day would have thought of as slapping a Band-Aid on a problem rather than healing the wound, okay? So the charity model assumes that the best that you can do is more or less, put some ointment and a Band-Aid on the wound. But the problem is still going to be there, right? And it's going to happen again and again. If there's a way that the problem can be fixed, right, and people can interact in a different way that does fix it, then shouldn't we be pursuing it in that way? Maybe the best way to understand this is if you do go to a church, and you know that a lot of churches, I know mine does, we collect items for the poor, like right now collecting backpack supplies for school kids, or we have a food pantry for them and so on. But at the same time, the people who come through the door at the food pantry or that get the backpacks, they aren't sitting next to you in the church. Hardly ever. And there is a real flaw there. There is a real problem there that Dorothy Day's writings and activities help to expose. Why aren't they there? Why aren't they a part of the Christian community that you are in? Why aren't the pews reserved for them too? And why don't they feel comfortable coming there? And in fact, why do we have big houses of worship with lots of rooms, and we have people living on the streets, or sitting outside of them waiting for a meal? It's hard to think about. It's a very different way of thinking about it. But in the model, the community model that, say, a Dorothy Day, espouses, it is not charity, but the full inclusion of the poor as equals. So in a Dorothy Day church, they'd be sitting in the pews, they'd be living in the church, or they'd be living in your home. Okay. And I understand the very dire consequences for safety in some cases of this. And I think Catholic worker houses, they know this directly, right? When you work there, you take a certain risk because not everybody who comes is safe for you. But they do it anyway, right? So imagine your church with the people that you help now simply being a part of your community. At least some are able to be a full part of that community. And then if people turn the church or the body of Christ, the Christian people into a community that simply helps each other, then they become a part of that. And then there is no separation. There is no rich and poor, or at least that distinction doesn't matter anymore. Okay. So imagine if your church was not a community of book groups and discussion groups and Bible study groups and groups that form to help people through charity, but an actual community where everybody could come and live, in effect, together in some way, helping each other. That's what she wanted. That was sort of the ideal vision of what she wanted. She says in Reflections on Work, we admit that there will always be the poor, the wastrel, the drunk, the sinner, but Christ came to save them. He loved them. We just insist that there don't need to be as many of them. The degraded, the twisted, the warped, the miserable ones, employed and unemployed. Yeah, that quote, the poor will always be with us, I think is often used as an excuse to continue that charity model, an acceptance of poverty as really beyond our control, right? Which we can do a little bit about, then we can feel okay about how we live. But we probably shouldn't feel okay to be in a church where almost everybody is middle and upper class, largely white in the case of my church, really, seeing itself as a dispenser of goods to a certain extent and not the extent of actual, love in the older sense, charity in the older sense, love. So Dorothy Day says charity is not enough. In the new sense, charity is not enough. If he has been robbed, restoration must be made to him. God put man on this earth to work for his bread, but what if there is no work? He has been defrauded of his work, of his labor, and of the fruits of his labor. He has neither work nor property, and his state is bad indeed. Right? So this reflects the fact that, we have all acquiesced to and to a great extent created a system in which many people cannot get good, dignified work. And we've created a situation in which some people have a whole lot and other people have next to nothing at all. And we expect this not to drive them crazy, which is interesting in and of itself. And we think that the solution to this is simply charity. So the true Christian position cannot look at another person as a target of just a certain amount of charity, in her view. Okay, so she had a lot of people within, with a lot of Christians did not agree with this. And of course, there's always been a large strain in American Christianity of blaming the poor for not having enough, gumption, not wanting to work hard enough, being dishonest, having character problems, etc. And of course, that reinforces the idea that you can't have them sitting next to you in the pews, that you can't rely on those people to do anything for you. Okay, so she disagreed profoundly with that, and she was very well aware that her view was quite different from the typical Christian view in America. I have a picture of Mark Fisher there, the author of Capitalist Realism, because I've done some videos on my channel about that book, and he deals with the fact that at this point in time, we tend to think of capitalism as the only possible system, even if we don't particularly like it, or even if we can see that it has some really detrimental effects on people and on the environment. We still just think it's the best that can possibly happen, and we will have this system for all time, and that there's not much point in fighting it in any way. I think that, again, Dorothy Day understood this mentality way back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. In All the Way to Heaven is Heaven, she says, assembly line production in the factory and mass production on the land are part of a social order accepted by the great mass of our Catholics, priests, and people. Even when they admit it is bad, they say, what can we do? That's capitalist realism. They throw up their hands. They say, what can we do? We are just passive kind of recipients of this system, this economic system that is seen as a force in its own right, kind of like evolution, which you cannot stop and which is stronger than the people that operate within it. Whereas she wanted to insist the economic system is a human creation. It hasn't always been this way. It won't always remain the same. And human beings are the creators of it. And so we're responsible if it's not working for people, but actually working against people. So she says the result is palliatives, taking care of the wrecks of the social order rather than changing it so that there would not be quite so many broken homes, orphan children, delinquents, industrial accidents, so much destitution in general, right? The palliatives would charity, right? Taking care of the wrecks of the social order, the people who just really get ruined by it, okay? And more or less saving their lives somehow. But doing nothing to change that continual cycle in which the system will create another set of the same victims of it, because we don't have enough imagination to break out of the current system. And we treat it like a monolith and like a sort of force of nature or an inevitability. One of the readings I recommended, Day quotes from Osservatore Romano, which is the Vatican newspaper. It's still around today. And she does this to show that the Catholic Church does have, quite a bit of content, quite a lot in teaching that criticizes capitalism quite profoundly. So not just the encyclicals that we read, but even in their, weekly communication here. Yes, this was from Distributism versus Capitalism from 1954. So she was quoting this newspaper from the 1954. Capitalism seizes, confiscates, and dries up wealth. It reduces the numbers of those who may enjoy riches, holds up distribution, and defies divine providence, who has given good things for the use of all men. St. Thomas Aquinas says that man must not consider riches as his own property, but as common good. This means that communism itself, as an economic system, apart from its philosophy, is not in contradiction with the nature of Christianity, as is capitalism. This is from, again, the Vatican newspaper. What it means by apart from its philosophy is part of the philosophy behind Marxism is a philosophic atheism. And so many, many people have conflated Marxist philosophic atheism with all communism. But communist proposals have been around for millennia, going all the way back to Plato's Republic. Certainly a lot during the Middle Ages and moving forward. And a lot of them, they weren't communisms that Karl Marx liked, but a lot of them were Christian forms of socialism and communism. So apart from that philosophic atheism, it's basically saying, which you can put aside, communism is more compatible with Christianity than capitalism. Capitalism is intrinsically atheistic. Capitalism is godless, not by nature of a philosophy, which it does not profess, but in practice, which is its only philosophy, by its insatiable greed and avarice, its mighty power, and its dominion. I might unpack that a little bit. So the greed and avarice, that's just a reference to materialism. Capitalism runs on materialism. And to put up material things as the ultimate goal of most of our activity is a form of idolatry, okay? And then, capitalism has this effect of building up the power and the dominion of the state, of peoples who are particularly wealthy. And this is also a form of idolatry. And it runs counter to God because it doesn't recognize God and God's authority. It puts human power and human authority ahead of God. And So whoever this writer was, she didn't name the author, but he was basically saying capitalism is intrinsically godless in a way that even communism is not. Communism is godless if its proponent claims atheism must be a part of this process, but not all communisms are, whereas capitalism's main driving force is nothing other than the buildup and increasing buildup of material wealth. And that is inherently godless.